You know, this evening is our quarterly singing, and it's on the first Sunday night of each quarter. We get together and spend the majority of our time singing. But have you ever thought about the role that singing plays in our worship? Have you ever thought about the role that you have in our singing and worship? And have you ever thought, is singing even important in our worship to God? Tonight I want to give you a couple of questions, and I'll answer the questions as we go, but I want to spend just a few minutes talking about a few questions about singing. And the first one is has singing always played an important role among God's people? And the answer to that is yes. In Exodus chapter 15 and verse 1, we see that Moses sang. 2 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, Hannah sang. In Luke chapter 2 and verse 15, the angels sang. Jesus and his disciples sang according to Matthew 26:30. Paul sang in 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verse 15. The Psalms were written to be sung and even contain musical notation. And even in heaven, there is singing according to Revelation chapter 15 and verse 3. So singing has always been an important part of God's people. Number two, what type of music was used in the New Testament worship? Well, according to Ephesians 5:19, Colossians 3:16, James 5:13, 1 Corinthians 14:15, Romans 15:9, and Acts 16:25, every command, every example that we see has an inference about direction of singing. And that inference is that it was always vocal. And no instruments of any kind were ever used. Third, was instrumental music practiced in the Old Testament? Well, according to 2 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 25 and 26, and in Psalms 150, both of those passages talk about instrumental music. But this was part of the Jewish worship, from along with burning incense, keeping the Sabbath, observing set feast days, and offering burnt offerings. And Jesus nailed all of that to the cross of Calvary, according to Colossians chapter 2 and verse 14. So we're not authorized to use instrumental music just because it was used in the Old Testament. And if that were true, we'd have to add those other things back as well. Number four, when did instrumental music begin to be practiced in the church? So in the New Testament church. And according to the Christian Courier, instrumental music was not practiced before the 7th century. And the first well-documented case of instrumental music wasn't until 1859 in Midway, Kentucky. Fifth, was instrumental music acceptable to the Reformation leaders? John Calvin said, musical instruments are no more suitable than the burning of incense. John Wesley wrote, I have no opposition to an organ in the chapel, provided it is neither seen nor heard. Adam Clark, noted commentator, wrote, I never knew instrumental music to be productive of good in worship. And there are many other examples of that. And lastly, how important is our singing? Well, if it's done well, the most beautiful music in the world is a cappella singing. There is no need for accompanying by man-made instruments. The word singing in all of its forms is found almost 150 times in the King James Version of the Bible. So our singing is important to God. It must be important to us as well. And while it's true that God is more concerned about our inward feeling than our outward sound, both are important. Because when our congregational singing is poorly done, and when we put little effort into it, it can dampen our spirits and deaden the worship. And because of its value, Christian people should work on their singing and be concerned about their singing. We should spend time on the subject of singing, and all who can possibly do so should join in the worship in song. That's why we sing. It's important to sing. Doesn't mean it all has to sound great, but I'll tell you, it sounded great tonight. I think everybody feels that way as well. But singing is important in worship. But if we can help you this evening in becoming a New Testament Christian, if we can pray for you or with you tonight, if there's anything that you need, won't you come while we stand and sing?